Thanks, everyone, and welcome as people are starting to join. I think you all know me, but since this is a recording and might be shared later, I'm Laura Knudsen, and I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency as a community involvement coordinator for the Portland Harbor Superfund site. And I just want to spend a few moments in this informal time we have together before the main collaborative meeting starts. And Caleb will briefly touch on this update in his general remarks too, but I want to do a little feedback loop on the Community Impacts Mitigation Plan, or CIMP, or we're calling it the CIMP, briefly, because we got some really rich feedback from all of you at the June 8th collaborative meeting on community impacts. And just a quick recap, the CIMP is a plan that EPA is hoping to have going into our negotiations for the agreements for remedial action, and that it's a plan that we hope to have in place when we actually start remedial action, which is the active construction part of the Superfund cleanup. So next slide, please. So just a quick summary of what we heard at the last collaborative meeting, June 8th, if you were there, and if you weren't, no worries. Triangle will, thank you, put in the chat a link to what you see, if you can see colors on this colorful screenshot, because we did some active feedback on potential community impacts that could occur during the active cleanup. And we did breakout groups, and there were stars on some of the priority elements on impacts that people identified. So some that were really resonating with a lot of folks, and that varied, but it helped kind of start some scoping in this space with community members and others on things that we might want to put into a community impacts mitigation plan, such as some of the stars here. And you can see, if you click on the link in the chat, you can see this larger, you can view it. I don't think you can add comments right now, but you can look at this in a larger way, such as impacts on sound, particularly at nighttime. So when we're actually doing the active cleanup and construction, sound concerns. And we also have like air quality issues. That was something that was starred, and there's some other ones on here that are starred too that you'll see when you click on that link, just to refresh your memory. Next slide, please. And so these are just some of the preliminary feedback categories that we heard from that exercise I just recapped that was done. So again, thank you all so much. And so a few things, this is not comprehensive and it's preliminary. We're going to continue to scope, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But some of the main categories that we heard that would be good to consider in the community impacts mitigation plan are things like use of high quality equipment. So making sure that the best technology is used, being cognizant if and how diesel would be used, and just making sure that we're really doing the best we can to make sure that high quality equipment is used and we're cognizant of emissions. Consistent communication with communities. So there's a couple parts to that. One, this cleanup, as estimated in the record of decision or final cleanup plan, could take 13 years. And so thinking through how to consistently keep people in the loop during that long time frame, which the collaborative is a good place for that. But there are other things that could be done too that we could think about in the CIMP. And additionally, thinking about more immediate ways to communicate as well. So if there is something going on with construction, maybe it's a sound concern or a light concern at a construction place where there's active remediation going on, a way that people can immediately bring up that concern with the people doing the work, maybe via a hotline, for instance. So things like that is something else that we're thinking about for putting into the community impacts mitigation plan. And then impacts to wildlife and river ecology, that was something that came up too that might be a bit more outside the community impacts mitigation plan, but something that is good to discuss, especially in this space, and something that other partners and other agencies in this space too might be able to think about or discuss. And then impacts from transportation of contaminants. So for those of you who were at the presentation that Caleb Schaefer, our EPA Portland Harbor team lead, gave at the June 8th collaborative meeting on this, the community impacts mitigation plan, and then what remedial action is going to look like, we talked about transloading materials. So that's where we would be taking materials out, putting it on a barge, and then taking that barge closer to the shore, and then putting those materials off the barge onto the land, and where those go is of concern and an impact to people, how it's transported, where it's transported. So thinking about that. And then of course, impacts to economy and loss of jobs, or if there are job opportunities too, that's something else in the community impact mitigation plan we could consider. So next slide, please. So some of the other things we heard about were potentially impacted communities and preliminary feedback on how to think about that in the community impact mitigation plan. So University of Portland students, people who are fishing, people who are boating, people who are using the river to recreate, such as with the University of Portland, we heard that there's a crew team, for instance. So being cognizant of how construction is being thought about and timing in that area, and also on their recreation fields nearby, thinking about that. Bicyclists, people experiencing houselessness, commercial businesses and communities along transportation routes that I just went over on the last slide briefly. So these are some of the ones that we've identified, and we are very want to continue to scope this for others too that might not be on here. Next slide, please. So lastly, just want to quickly recap that the proposed timeline for the community impacts mitigation plan. So in 2022, where we are right now, into 2023, we want to continue discussing potential impacts and really scope out those elements of the community impact mitigation plan, both with community members and performing parties. And we really want to start to develop an outline. We would like to do this tentatively. EPA wants to create an outline of the community impacts mitigation plan that in next year we would start to take to different spaces, community spaces if possible, some of you here as members, and also back to performing parties to go through that outline and see what we might be missing, what should be added, kind of like what we did for the Portland Harbor story map. And then in 2024, tentatively, these are all tentative timelines, but we would want to create a final written community impact mitigation plan that would still be draft, because as we enter into enforcement agreement negotiations, the idea would be to bring that community impact mitigation plan into that space. And it would need to still align with the information management platform that we've talked about previously. So next slide, please. I think one more slide. So this is just in the interim of us, working to create this outline based on all the great feedback that was given previously. Josie Clark is our point of contact for EPA on the technical side. Caleb Schaefer is our team lead, and myself, we're all working together along with the rest of our technical and legal team members on this community impact mitigation plan. But Josie is the best point of contact. If you have other thoughts, you can always contact me too. But Josie is leading this piece on the technical side, and her information is there too. So I think that is it. And thank you all so much.